you were deep in your modeling career and you ended up in the ICU. I want to deconstruct it. What happened? What did you learn? And what did you do differently?
I was at the height of my modeling career. For me, it was really important to achieve success because I struggled at school with dyslexia. So I took my entire life feeling unsmart, misunderstood. I didn't think I was very good at anything. And when your financial worth depends on what you look like, that's a very big thing to carry when you're very young. I had got to the point of habitual burnout, which is the very extreme end. I had organ failure, sepsis, I had E. coli, I was internally bleeding, and then got rushed into ICU. It was that moment that made me look at myself. I needed to understand that I was living on these green juices and living on massaged kale because I thought I was being healthy, but I was ultimately hyper deprived. So I went back to school. That's when everything changed for me. I will never forget that moment with that professor. He was the first person to ever tell me at 24, you are smart and we're going to show you how your brain works. So someone who was told they were stupid their entire life, that one person who showed me compassion and empathy changed my life.
Sarah Ann Macklin is the popular podcast host of Live Well, Be Well. Sarah Ann has a Bachelor of Science in Human Nutrition, first-class honors. She is the founder of the Be Well Collective. Marie Claire has claimed that Sarah is the Jamie Oliver of nutrition. Her impactful 2019 TED Talk, Our Models, Role Models, placed her prominently in a role of leadership regarding physical and mental health. In her podcast, Sarah Ann provides evidence-based tools that merge nutrition, mindset, and self-compassion for a new multi-dimensional approach to wellness. As she puts it, science simplified, health humanized. No quick fixes, no one-size-fits-all solutions, just real, expert-driven science and practical strategies to help you take control of your internal health, not simply the external. As a reminder, if you have questions about the Treated with Dr. Sarah podcast, or your hormones, or nutrition, or other aspects of your health, maybe give us some ideas for future topics or guests, leave us a message over at speakpipe.com/treated. In today's conversation with Sarah Ann Macklin, we talk about Sarah Ann's modeling career and how it ground to a halt over her nutrition, what she was surprised to learn from that experience, and what she now does differently. We talk about compassion in a way that I hope shifts your concept of the word. So please join me in welcoming our guest this week, Sarah Ann Macklin. Sarah Ann Macklin, I am so excited to be in real life with you.
Me too. I'm so happy this is happening.
So we met on your podcast about a year ago. And we became fast friends. You are doing such important work in the world as a nutritionist, as the founder of Live Well, Be Well. You're a model. You're doing such important work in the world. You've got a new book coming out that we can't scoop, but we're going to talk about some of the challenges that led to this big book that you're writing. Sarah, tell us about who you are and what's your mission.
I'm the founder of Live Well, Be Well, which is a big health podcast, which looks at nutritional health, emotional health, physical health, mental health. It looks at the whole body and the individual. And it does it from a very compassionate lens. And that is my mission, is to connect people with their health, but with themselves. Because, you know, for me, my own personal journey was that I was very disconnected from myself. And so if I can empower people in that way, that is my mission through all the work that I do.
You had a moment that I've heard about before, and I want to share it with our listeners. When you were deep in your modeling career and you ended up in the ICU, and I want to deconstruct it. I want you to share what happened, what did you learn, and what did you do differently?
Yeah. It's a big moment, actually, because it happened for me, obviously, now 12 years ago. And I think it's taken me a good 10 years to even be able to speak about it, to really digest it. Because sometimes when we have these big moments in our lives, we sometimes think that someone has this epiphany in that moment and everything changes. And that didn't happen to me. It was a 10-year learning journey of, understanding why that happened. But ultimately, until that point, I was living in New York and I was at the height of my modeling career. And if you think about 12 years ago, health wasn't as accessible. There was only a very few small platforms, but it wasn't science-based. And so for me, I was in a very high-performing environment. I was signed as a model when I was 16. So the understanding of the emotional aspect, looking after your mental health, and the physical aspect was basically survival. And I had become so disconnected from my body. I didn't know who I was. And for me, it was really important to achieve success because, unknown at this time, I struggled at school with dyslexia. So I took my entire life feeling unsmart, misunderstood. I didn't think I was very good at anything. And then I had this incredible opportunity to become a model, which went extremely well. It was the first time in my life that I was recognized for something. And so the pain of losing that, I'd overridden every single in my body to understand that I was suffering. So I tried everything to, when your financial worth depends on what you look like, that's a very big thing to carry when you're very young. And so for me, I had basically got to the point of habitual burnout, which is the very extreme end. So, I had like organ failure, I had sepsis, I had E. coli, I had 10 burst cysts, I was internally bleeding. I had basically a seizure and then got rushed into ICU and stayed in there for a very long time. And it was very interesting because now I look back on that and you have all the different consultants treating you for different parts of your body.
All the silos of medicine.
All the silos of medicine. And, you've got the cardiovascular doctor, you've got someone looking at the renal health, you've got somebody looking at hematology, you've got a gyno because that's where my birth cysts were. And they're all treating it individually. And so they're kind of telling me which parts of my body have all shut down.
And they're not connecting with each other.
They're not connecting with each other. And so, I was in there for a long time and I came out and then I went back to New York, but I was completely broken. I might have not looked like full health, but I could walk and I was not in hospital anymore. And then my dad had a brain hemorrhage 6 months later. And it was at that moment that I was in New York and he was in London, or he was in England. And I called my agent to say I need to get on a plane to go home and see him. And there was a kind of a discussion around a job that I was meant to be doing the next day and whether I should wait. And I didn't know if I was going to ever see my dad again. And it was that moment that I realized in myself that 6 months earlier, I was in a critical position, but it was the compassion and love that I had for my dad that made me actually look inward and go, whoa, this was you in a really bad way. And he was in the ICU for a very, very long time after that. And it was that moment that made me look at myself and go, are you happy? You've kind of got all the things of success on the outward section, but are you happy? And I wasn't, and I didn't know who I was. I knew I was so disconnected from my body. And the first thing that I knew that I needed to do was nourish myself. I needed to understand what that was because I was living on these green juices and living on massaged kale because I thought I was being healthy, but I was ultimately hyper deprived. So I went back to school, went back to my Bachelor of Science in Nutritional Science. And that's when everything changed for me because that's when I figured out my dyslexia. I figured out that I wasn't stupid. And I had somebody empathize with me, a professor, for the first time when I went to drop out. Because I said, I'm not good at this. And she said, you are. I just think you're dyslexic. And that moment of somebody showing empathy to me gave myself, which I didn't know it was called this at the time, but self-compassion. That warm feeling that I had that I just had never, ever had for myself because it's somebody understood me and didn't judge me. And that
Sarah,
changed my life.
I'm feeling that moment with you and it's making me tear up because even though you got signed at age 16 as a model, you were seen by so many people.
So many.
But you were seen in a different way in that moment with that professor who said, I think you're neurodiverse and we can find a way to work around it. Don't drop out of school. There was a compassion at the center of it and there was a way that you were seen. You had a clean mirror.
Yeah. I had a complete clean mirror. I mean, everyone in my life told me I was making the wrong decision to go back to school. And I was also financially tied to a mortgage, and I had a certain lifestyle that I was doing, and all of a sudden I was about to leave that and start completely again. It was like a Legally Blonde moment, I literally was embodying Legally Blonde. And I sat there with a Mulberry handbag and a Ralph Lauren jacket, not knowing what's going on. And, I remember going, yeah, I'm not cut out for this, because I couldn't understand anything. And, I will never forget that moment. And I have so much admiration and respect and gratitude for that professor. He was the first person to ever tell me at 24, you are smart. And we're gonna show you how your brain works. The sadness around it is that they label you as that you're diagnosed with dyslexia and you are labeled as disabled at school, which I find one of the most, I don't want to say the word traumatic, but like one of the most hardest things to get your head around, because you then ultimately feel that you're very different. But actually what I figured out is that's my superpower, and I needed to understand it. And I ended up graduating with a first class honours. So someone who was like thinking they were stupid their entire life was told they were stupid their entire life. And that one person who showed me compassion and empathy changed my life and led me down a very strong mission to heal myself, but to really help other people to never get to that state.
That's what I really feel in the time that I've spent with you and your excellent podcast. I love listening to your podcasts. There's a way that this journey, starting at 16 through to the ICU at age 23, going back to studying nutrition at 24, it makes you relate to people in a way that I don't think you would if you didn't have some of those challenges that you experienced.
Oh my God, unless you hit rock bottom, you never will empathize with other people on that. I mean, I didn't know who I was. I didn't even know what the word self-compassion meant. And ultimately, like, it's interesting when you sit and hear people's stories about why they're on a mission. I believe everyone, if they've got a real purpose behind it, it's because they lost it in themselves. And it's not until I started doing the podcast later, because my story after that was I went and set up a not-for-profit organization to help, and we helped over 10,000 people to this day within mental health. So I was practicing nutrition in my clinic, and I was running a mental health organization and working with policy within the industry. But the irony was doing the giving back helped build my self-worth, helped me connect to common humanity, that everyone is struggling in their own way. Yet when I was in the modeling industry, it was all centered into, I couldn't connect to other people. I felt hyper isolated in my own world. So I didn't see struggles from other people. Nobody was being authentic and talking about this. And I was, one, English, so no one talks about their feelings, especially back then. And two, I had no voice of language to understand what I was going through because it was never mirrored to me. So for me to see that when I was running a not-for-profit and see the pain that so many other people were going to, it made me feel more human and connect on that common humanity. And that's a huge, like a lever when we connect to compassion and understanding ourselves more, that we can see that actually going through moments of pain, challenge, adversity, it's all part of being human. But since that time until now, we now see the perfection of lenses that are shown through social media or podcasts or whatever channel that we're listening to. We're normally listening to kind of the end result. And I think that's why it's so important to kind of say, it wasn't that one moment and I had it all figured out. I went on a very confusing journey of figuring this out. And I think that's why my mission's become stronger, and I'm wanting to share more voices and share it in a different way to really get people to feel that they're not alone, because that was my biggest thing, was that I felt hyper alone through this, and we're all going through it.
Well, it feels like it brought this lesson about compassion to the core of your being. And I feel like compassion is one of those words that I've been using for decades casually.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got a relationship to it, a depth with compassion and self-compassion that I really want to bring forward and amplify. So can you talk a bit about what is compassion? What does it mean to you? And it's not lost on me that we live in a culture where compassion is not front and center.
No.
And it needs to be.
Mm-hmm.
So please tell us, like, what's your experience with compassion? How do you define it?
Yes.
How do you feel into it?
It's a very good question. And there's so many ways that I would love to kind of explore this, because you've got you and I are both science driven. You've got the science element of it, where the data shows, and I've interviewed, Dr. Kirsten Neff to Paul Gilbert, who is one of the top compassion experts in the UK. And they both have very different views of compassion, and they're both right in their own sense. And it's connecting with common humanity. It's having kindness for yourself, but it's also having a sense of mindfulness about connecting to where you are, to connect to the mindful brain, to be in the present moment. But for me, what compassion means and what self-compassion means ultimately is that it's a form of self-kindness. And that's not actually a word, but that's one that I relate to, in the sense that when I think about compassion and self-compassion, it can feel sometimes a word that feels very monkish and very far away from us to connect to that. It can sometimes feel that we've got a bit of friction to love ourselves, especially in England. If you tell somebody to love themselves, they run a mile because they feel so uncomfortable. Right. And I really struggled I've struggled to like myself for a very long time. And when I started realizing that we're evolutionary wired to be more self-critical than self-compassionate, it all started to make sense. And we are not ever taught to accept ourselves and love ourselves. We're always told to be better and improve and be nice to other people, but we're very rarely taught how to do that to ourselves. So for me, self-compassion is all about being self-kind. And if you think about that in a way that we can relate this to food, because this is kind of where it all started for me, was that if you have a daughter or a son or a niece or a nephew or a best friend or someone that you love, and they come to you and say, Sarah, I really want some ice cream. And you say, okay, that's fine. I can give you some ice cream. And then they say the next day, I want some more ice cream, some more ice cream, some more ice cream. After a while, you're going to say, well, no, this is too much. It's not good for you. You do that from a place of love. That's a place of love. You're doing it. You're not doing that to be mean. You're doing that because you're going, well, actually, that's going to, and if we're doing that every day, that's going to start causing metabolic issues, and that's going to start messing with your sleep, and that's going to start messing with your emotions and your brain, and you're going to be having too much sugar. But every now and again, of course, I'd love to share that with you. And you do that because you love them. When it comes to ourselves, we don't do that. We have no connection to actually what's good for us. And so we end up using that in a sense of using it as an emotional connection to food. And so for me, the most important thing to get people to relate to this term of self-kindness is to know that they're making all of their decisions from a place of how they would do that for someone that they really, really love. And I think that's one of the most kind of actionable ways that I can describe what I mean in the terms of self-kindness.
I love that. And it's, as a bioengineer and someone who likes to measure things, I'd love to riff a little bit on
Let's do it.
How you measure self-compassion or self-kindness.
Mm-hmm.
So I like this action item of, how would you treat someone else, and using that as a measure for how you're treating yourself. I'm curious, just like I feel like we're learning how to do molecular profiles of safety.
Yes.
And security and balance in the autonomic nervous system between the sympathetic nervous system, fight, flight, freeze, the parasympathetic nervous system, rest and digest, or stay and play. I wonder if we could come up with some ways to track or somehow, as you said, be less monkish about self-compassion and be more deliberate. So do you have any ideas about how we can measure that?
I do. Some I can't fully explain, because then I had nothing to come on in 6 months' time and talk about the book on.
Right.
But
can't skip the book. But
yes. But what I would say is we have 60 to 80,000 thoughts a day. Okay, 80% of them are negative. Let's just start there.
Right.
Because I think the mindfulness is a really key part to this entire scenario. What I don't want to do is people to become so worried and panicked on how much they're talking to themselves negatively that they lose the whole concept of the importance of self-compassion. You're going to get it wrong. That's the common humanity part, right? That's the part of accepting. And so much about self-kindness is having that forgiveness with yourself. And that doesn't mean that you can just forgive every single thing that happens. It means that when you make a mistake, you reflect on it. Similarly to as a friend would come to you and say, I don't know if I can swear on here.
Oh, yes.
But like, I fucked up and I've done this. And you probably go, yeah, you did. You did fuck up. It's like kind of holding the accountability with it. But the quicker that you hold that and you see that, the quicker you can make a change. If you don't, you can very much disconnect and keep making the same mistakes and the same problems and the same wrong choices. So if I'm trying to think about this in a data point of view, and I could go down the kind of physiological point of view as well, which how our thoughts actually do change ourselves and our physiology. And that's another part that connects with the food. But if you do start there, the biggest thing that I would say is like starting to take accountability for how often you're self-critical to yourself. Just having that realization is, I think, the most important step when it comes to data. So it could be a really easy way is when I see people and patients in clinic, we naturally get them to do a food diary just so I can give, an overarching view on, okay, what are they having? You try to reduce recall bias. And
how long are your food diaries?
I try
like
to
3
get
days,
a week.
7 days.
I try and get a week.
I try to get a week too.
That's really important because you're not getting a snapshot. Okay, you're getting like a longer perspective. If patients stick to it, that's the harder part. Similarly, within my food diaries, I also get them to put where they're eating, who they're eating with, how are they feeling when they're eating. We're kind of missing out this huge chunk. And you can see very, very quickly if they've got a self-critical lens or not. And so for me, this emotional aspect is really, really important. So try to think about this as a game similar to a food diary. Every time you have a self-critical thought, and it can be hard, but you can do this for a couple of days, you write it down. And when you start realizing how many times these thoughts are coming up, you might step back and go, oh my gosh, it's literally every minute. You might get to the point where you get halfway through the day and go, I can't keep writing this down because there's so many. So it's actually having that first reflective process into how often are these thoughts coming up, because then you're so much more aware.
This is potent. And it reminds me of something that John O'Donohue said once, the Irish poet. He talked about how we have 7 ideas that we get married to. And they're the ideas that we just think about over and over and over again. And most of them are negative, to your point about the 80% that are negative. And we don't become conscious of how those 7 main thoughts drive us. And so your point about writing down those repetitive thoughts as part of your food diary, along with the social context, I think that's very powerful.
It's really powerful. Honestly, that was always one of the most pivotal moments of our main consultations. Because one, you see in column 1, people first of all with the food go, well, oh wow, I'm actually under eating, which is sometimes a big surprise for people. And sometimes people go, oh, I can actually see that I didn't realize how much I was eating, can go either end of the spectrum. But then the biggest thing that I see is most people now eat alone. So, in those 7 days, sometimes 95% of them, they're eating on their own. So what does that normally lead to? Well, that normally leads to not being mindful. And so when we're not mindful, what do? We maybe eat quicker. We maybe are more distracted. We maybe are not connecting to the food that we're eating. So
we're not chewing as much.
We're not chewing. We're eating in such a rush because we're looking at our digital devices because we're lonely. And so we're not connecting after those 20 minutes of how much food we're eating. We might be eating for the wrong reasons. We might be eating completely out of boredom. And then if we are mirroring people that we're eating with, are those people helpful to us? Are they making us feel anxious? All of these kind of social constructs are so important when it comes to food. And then what's your emotional state when you're eating? Because that drives the very first column. So if you're stressed, your cortisol is going to be more spiked, which takes away all of the blood from your digestive system. It puts you into fight or flight. It goes into sympathetic nervous system that we spoke about. Are you calm? Are you making mindful choices? So like all of these tie so importantly together. But the thing that I see is most people just look at column one. And that's where they end up making their decisions from. And we need to start at the third column and work our way back.
I like that so much. And I want to make this piece with cortisol a little bit bigger because I feel like cortisol is this, it's meant to serve a particular role in the body,
100%.
Right? It's meant to be part of your alarm system, stress response. And yet now so many of my clients and patients have high cortisol, or they've had high cortisol for so long, they now have low cortisol, which is what we see in trauma and post-traumatic stress disorder. And as you described, the cortisol shunts blood toward your big muscle groups so that you can go into fight or flight.
It's what needed for our survival.
It's what we needed for survival.
Helping us.
But it's not helping us anymore.
No.
And we also know that the parent hormone, corticotropin releasing hormone, is poking holes in the gut lining and leading to leaky gut, increased intestinal permeability, which increases inflammation,
immunity,
and affects your immunity, puts you at a greater risk of autoimmunity and autoimmune disease, dysregulation of the immune system. There's this intersection between cortisol and compassion and self-compassion that I'm really curious about. And I haven't thought about that before.
And this is what I'm right. Well, this is part of my work.
So I want to feel into that with you.
This is where it all connects.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's, as you said, it's a very important hormone to understand, but it's one that, has its positive effects when used correctly, when used in small amounts, which is the whole point of acute stress.
Yes.
It can be good stress.
So let's bring some story to this because it sounds to me, tell me if I'm right, that cortisol, maybe from around age 16 to 23, had a different role.
I'd say from the age of 8.
Oh, the age of 8. Okay, so explain.
Because the age of 8 for me, because when I was younger, very curious child, for me, I'm quite extroverted. I get my energy from people. So when I first went to school and I was learning all the play stuff, it was great. I was in my element. As soon as I was being told that I couldn't do things, or, I literally looked at my school reports by saying, Sarah's a very frustrating child to teach. She gets hyper high scores on certain topics that nobody can get. And then she flunks on the most basic. I mean, how they did not realize I was neurodivergent, I question. But, that's what I was told my entire life. Like, you're hyper frustrating. Why can you not get this simple thing? So I think I spent from the time of 8 of the realization, what I was being told was always trying to cover up what everyone else was good at. And so I spent most of my school life in heightened anxiety, trying to cover up. If we had to do a spelling test, I would ask to go home. I wouldn't turn up to class because I was so scared of being humiliated. And for me, that was really important because I wanted to be accepted. I didn't want to be different. Because I didn't understand that I was different. I lived in this high stress state of always trying to cover something up. So my high anxiety,
I hear the shame. I hear the
huge shame.
The way that the adults in your life were not attuned to what was happening. You didn't have a clean mirror. You really didn't have one until 24, it sounds like.
No, not at all. Not until I decided to go. And that was also anxiety driving because I thought, how am I going to support myself? Or actually, why am I going back to school? My previous experiences that I'm not good at it. And so I think even through those years, I had hyper high anxiety, and I killed myself to get that first, because I was like, I'm going to prove to myself and to everyone that I can do this. And I think that's been a big driving force within me, which is why the compassion element is fundamental, because whenever I know that I drive myself very hard and I put myself under so much stress, the first thing that goes is my health. And ultimately, there's been moments in that modeling career where I was having all the health things that you're meant to be having, the green juices, loads of plant-based foods, all the legumes. I was living a model diet. It wasn't an eating disorder. I wasn't ever not eating. I was eating this hyper clean diet. I wasn't on a severe calorie restriction, but the stress was making all the weight drop off me. And so when I go, well, actually, I'm living a diet that was handed as the best diet to have, and I was completely broken, then surely just having the best diet isn't the answer. It's part of the answer, but I needed to start way before that. I needed to get the foundations of my mindset right. And so many people try to hop to one vertical or one narrative, and they serve a purpose. But if we're living in hyper high stress, in deprivation, in criticism, it completely counteracts all of that work. And so that's what I found. That's what happened to my body. And so, from 8 years old of living in that hyper anxiety, not good enough state, shrouded with shame and guilt and also just frustration, not understanding, that was the missing part.
Yes. Well, you're describing survival mode very accurately. And I think it's so helpful. One of the things I've been hearing from my patients, especially in the last couple of years, is, Dr. Sarah, I just realized I'm in survival mode. I've been in survival mode for decades. I'm so hard driving, and it's related to childhood trauma. It's related to this thing that happened to me as an adult. It's related to birth trauma, whatever it's related to. But survival mode shows up in so many different ways. And it sounds like you made a very conscious decision to shift out of survival mode. And compassion was a big part of that. The other piece that you mentioned that I want to pick up again is forgiveness. And you were talking about, tracking those thoughts that you have along with your food diary, noticing how many negative ones there are. And then there's this piece of forgiveness, which I also connect to cortisol.
Huge.
And there's a professor at Stanford who talks a lot about this. So tell us about forgiveness.
It's such a big part of the puzzle. We know how important it is to try and forgive others so we don't carry that burden. The interesting thing is when we hold a grudge against someone else, they're not suffering, you are. Right? So you're kind of carrying that energy within yourself. So we know the importance of, if we can try and forgive, we can let go. And the big part of letting go and allowing that to go is forgiveness. But so rarely do we forgive ourselves. We hold ourselves to such a high standard, or we always kind of try and go back and think, well, if I did this differently, it would have been different. But actually, forgiveness is one of the biggest learning mechanisms that I've had to have, because as I was hearing you talk earlier very quickly about, similar to all the patients that come in, it all centers on not being good enough. Ultimately, all of these moments center to us not being good enough. And actually, if we can just forgive ourselves in those moments and learn, failure is not failure. Failuring is a moment of growth. It's a moment of data. We were speaking about the importance of well, how can we track this? We'll track about how you can forgive yourself. Track about what did I learn from that experience? What was my learning? How can I support myself better next time? And so many times we think about, well, how could I have handled that conversation with that person differently next time? Think about that with yourself. How could I support myself in that moment when I'm feeling that way again? What could I do to make that better for me? And that's what essentially I had to go through, was understanding every time, well, how could I have supported myself better? How could I have looked at that differently? How could I have not have gone to the worst case scenario? All of those moments are so critical, because that gives us all the information to allow us to, when we get to that moment again, because there will be that moment. And it makes me sit here and sound like I have this huge amount of compassion for myself every day. And it's still a learning process. I still have to kind of recalibrate my mind.
So I want to dive deeper into the recalibration.
Mm.
And I wonder if there's a particular area that we could talk about where you could put this into practice for us and show us, what is that recalibration for you?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe the way that you eat, or resistance training, or meditation, whatever it is. Like what feels juicy for you?
Gosh, I could actually do all of them. But let's talk about, because we haven't spoken about exercise yet, and I can talk about that and food, because I used to be the girl that got up and did a soul cycle at 6. That was me.
Yes.
Right? And I would get up and I would be, and I'm not a morning person. And so for me, I always had that lens that to be hyper successful, I need to be in that class at 6 a.m. because I need to then be able to be at whatever I'm doing by 8. I need to be showered, I need to be coffeeed, and I need to be ready to rock and roll, because that's how high performers execute. So for years, I did this.
Yeah.
I'd do a Barry's, I'd do a soul cycle. I would do everything at super high intensity, and my body was screaming, but I would shut it off because no, this is the one way to go.
And you're teaching your body survival mode.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? So you're getting up earlier than probably your body wants to get up.
Yes.
You're forcing yourself to go to soul cycle.
Mm-hmm.
You're pedaling on a bike as fast as you can to really loud music.
Yeah.
And, the instructor is shouting at you.
Mm-hmm.
It's all a stress response. It raises cortisol hugely.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got the coffee, and then you start your day.
Exactly. And, I'd be like, oh, I'm not, I probably won't eat till about 10 or whatever that is, that silly voice in your mind going, I need to be fasting for this amount of time to have my ultimate health benefit. So I'm giving myself this narrative of like the importance of how I should be living for health. And actually now what I realized is, one, my body was actually storing more food because it was in survival mode of going, oh my gosh, he's now going to feed me. Take all that in. I was also, going through moments of feeling so light and dizzy and lightheaded because, one, the cortisol was making everything more brain foggy, but also in the same way that I never had a moment where I connected to my body for what I actually really needed. So how I make my stuff now is I kind of scrapped that thought process of, okay, this obviously works for a lot of people. This does not work for me, because I was feeling sick by 2:00 in the afternoon. I'd become hypoglycemic in moments because I was just pushing my body too much. My muscles were hurting. I wasn't recovering. And although there was
by hypoglycemic, you mean that you were feeling lightheaded and maybe a little jittery,
and nauseous and sick.
Nauseated.
I wasn't making any sense. My brain had no energy.
Yes.
It was completely deprived of glucose, and I have very low blood sugar anyway. So it was a disaster. So this kind of high performance that I was ultimately trying to achieve was completely affecting my actual output of performance. Although on script, it looked like the perfect protocol. So, I guess when you hit these moments, right, where you are exhaustion, and that was my first burnout, but I've had quite a few, is always my reminder of this is not working. Stop. And when you have to physically stop, your body just wants to sleep and it wants to rest. And after multiple rounds of this happening for me, I started to go, I need to do something differently. And so I started to understand, like, what is it that my body needs? So now I don't get up and do a 6 a.m. soul cycle. Now I love yoga, I love Pilates, I try to walk everywhere. I might do a run at the weekend when I've had a busy week and I've not moved very much. My body naturally wants to run. But for me, my mornings are now more about nourishment as opposed to punishment, which is what I was doing. And so for me, I don't derive my energy first thing in the morning. I'm not a protocol where I need to get up and hit the gym within the first hour of waking and then have a coffee an hour after that because I've been told that I need to do that. For me, my body feels the most nourished and the most powerful and the most high performing when I actually get a good sleep and I wake up naturally at 7:15, right? And my
sounds much better.
natural body wakes up, and then I stretch, and then I have a slow morning, and I write down my day, and I go, okay, that's what I need to do today. That's important. And then I might walk and get a nice coffee and have some breakfast. And then I'll sit down at my laptop, and then I might do yoga if I'm lucky at lunch because I've got a bit of a break and my body's woken up and it needs to stretch. That's my protocol now, and that works for me.
So I want to speak to our listener who maybe is a mother, has a couple of kids, and they're saying, Sarah, that sounds amazing.
But I can't do that. I know I
can't do
don't
that.
have children. That's why I'm lucky.
There is a middle ground here.
I think what I'm trying to say is the moment of the mother really comes into me, because I think this is where I was connecting a lot of the dots. When I was hearing a lot of people speak about a certain way to work out or eat or whatever, the biggest thing that would come into my mind was, well, what do mums do when they don't have any sleep at all, right? They're literally living on 2 to 3 hours worth of sleep. And they're wanting to feel, they're desperate to feel better. They're desperate to feel like supported in any way. Because that is probably the most intense job you will ever have in your entire life.
True.
And in that moment, if a woman is listening to the most important foundation for health is sleep, and they're like, I physically cannot get 7 hours of sleep, already what's the thing in their mind? Well, it's not worth it. I feel crap. Or everything else is going to be hard for me for the rest of the day. I can't even achieve the one simple thing that they're all telling me to do. Like, you're shrouding yourself and like, well, actually, I'm not good enough. My health is going to completely deprive. I'm going to age. My metabolism is going to be everywhere. So you're already going through this thought process. And I think the biggest compassionate way to look at health is that you flux. There is not one solution. And I gave that kind of very like rigid example of me changing from a high performing to more of a calming start. Because for me, I had to recalibrate my mind that actually, if you just do yoga once a week, which is a stretch in your home, and you feel better, then that works for you in that moment of whatever part of life you're in. And I think this is the biggest health message, that there's not one perfect way to be. The perfect way to be is like, what's your body crying out for right now? And how can you support that? And it might that you're only still going to get 2 hours worth of sleep for the next 3 months. How are we going to cope with all the other things that you can do to support yourself? You know, all of those moments of how can we make sure that you've got enough nourishing food every week in your fridge that you can grab things really, really quickly. That's going to help support you in that way. Like, how can we make sure that you've got water in your eyesight or where you're feeding your baby at any point so we can just keep you hydrated because you're going to be really tired. Like, all of those messaging are so important because that's going to help support that person in those times.
Yeah, I want to reflect back that you just connected the dots in a very powerful way. And when I was calling out, okay, the mother who's not sleeping, who's got the kids, and she's saying, yeah, that sounds great, Sarah, I can't do that. It's also the first exercise you gave us, which is looking at the negative thoughts that we have and not blaming the woman for having those negative thoughts, because I've been there. I know what it's like. But also, you said the word flux, which I think is really important here. And often it can be just choosing one small thing. The other piece I want to reflect back to you is that getting up at 6 or going to the 6 a.m. Soul Cycle class with the coffee afterwards, fasting until 10, to me, that sounds like cognitive override. Like, it's making a decision, almost like a drill sergeant, top down. Here's what your schedule is today, Sarah. Whereas what you're talking about as a shift, whether we can do a morning like you or not, is what does my body want? What are my muscles needing right now? Do I need to do 10 minutes of mobility, which is something I've become obsessed with?
Me too.
Like, I can't do an hour and a half of yoga every morning like I used to, but I can do 10 to 15 minutes of mobility. So I really appreciate the way that you're making this feel like an integrated process. Thank you for that.
I think Well, thank you for reiterating it so well. I think the biggest health message of all of that for me is what you said, the connection back to your body. Because the way that health messaging was communicated to me made me disconnected from my body.
Yes.
And I think that's where the self-kindness comes in, that even if it's, I can't even get up and do 10 minutes of mobility because my screaming child will not stop, is that you could maybe even just put your hand on your heart and breathe.
Yeah.
And you ask yourself what you need. Like, how often do you do that? Like, what do I need? Like, what is it that I need? That's so powerful. And your body will tell you. As you said, like, my mind overrode it. I had no idea. And if you can literally put your hand on your heart, which is such a compassionate thing to do, and say, like, what do I need? And breathe into it, your body will tell you. And that's the best way you can communicate health to yourself.
You just gave us a parasympathetic tool. So putting your hand on your chest over your heart, feeling the temperature of your hand, feeling the weight of your hand, slowing down your breath, maybe even closing your eyes if you're not driving, and feeling that sensation helps us get out of the cognitive override that keeps putting us into survival mode. And it's the pattern that we want to break. So I really appreciate that. So I have to ask you, because I saw on your Substack.
Yes, the compassionate cure.
Yes. And so I want to hear about that. And I want to hear about blue mind theory, because I saw this come up on your social media recently and I got super excited. I live at the ocean. I really believe that the ocean water is feminine, and it's got such a critical part of helping us be more embodied. So share with us a bit about your Substack, what you're excited about, anything you want to share about, anything further about compassion or blue mind theory.
Well, thank you very much for bringing it up. The compassionate cure is kind of my extension to all the work that I do, and it really combines all of the health, the nutrition, and the kind of how you can use compassion as your compass to get to where you want to get to in moments, as opposed to what we should be doing. Like, what do you need? And so the compassion cure is essentially like moments that come up for me that I find really important to write about. Like, my most recent one was body intelligence.
Yes.
You have emotional intelligence, a lot of people know, but body intelligence, your BQ, is so important. So it's like the signals that your body is sending to you. And I believe that these are the things that are really going to transform your health, right? It's not the 9 a.m. Exactly.
The rucking, 80 pounds.
It's not all that.
The bro approach.
There's none of
to
that.
health span.
It's none of that. It's not the infrared sauna. The blue mind theory is something that I wrote about recently because I found it, for me, the most important way that I was connecting back to myself. I live in London. I'm now here in LA. LA is much more relaxed than London, but I lived in New York for a very long time, and they're two quite intense cities. And I was devoid of any blue mind. And the first thing I want to say is I don't want anyone to listen to this and think I have to live near the ocean to get the effects of what blue mind is. And I'll tell you what it is, because that's something that originally can put people off, that they don't have access. So first of all, like, blue mind is essentially connecting to anything that is water. So it could be an aquarium. It could even be a pitcher. Okay. It could even be the sounds of water. But blue mind theory was essentially coined by an amazing marine biologist. And he believed very much in the blue mind theory and the red mind theory. And the red mind theory was all about the things of daily stress that increase our stress response, the overconsumption of data that we're getting, anything that is making us feel very shut down. And blue mind is much more expansive. And so essentially, if you're thinking about this in the terms of an ocean, your horizon is so much wider. So when your horizon is wider, this naturally works with the parasympathetic nervous system. But also there's so much more grounding energy. So we know that anything that's connected to water works with our parasympathetic response. And I was finding this naturally just whenever I was in nature and I was connecting to anything that was water, my stress response was lower. And sometimes I think we can become so much in the weeds about whether it's feeling better or self-development or personal or whatever it is. And we can get our heads stuck in books or, the information overload. And sometimes we literally just need a prescription for nature and getting out. And so when I started realizing the science behind blue mind theory, it made so much more sense. And now they're actually treating patients with anxiety and depression in cities with VR headsets where they're putting them into nature scenarios with water. And it's having such profound results.
And they're measuring the effects. So I imagine they're looking at things like heart rate variability, maybe resting heart rate, maybe cortisol levels.
That's a big one.
We talk a lot about nature deficit and how a lot of us go into sympathetic overdrive and we're not fluidly going back and forth between the sympathetic nervous system, which we need, into the parasympathetic and back again. We're meant really to be sort of 50-50. Equilibrium between the two.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly in my body, especially when I'm traveling, I spend too much time in the sympathetic overdrive. And so with the science that's being collected on blue mind theory, what do you know? Like, what is there a particular duration, like with the VR work, or what have you noticed yourself in your own body? Like, what's the dose of water that makes a difference in your system?
The data's still out there. I think I could definitely find it and send it and give it to you after this.
Maybe for the show notes.
Yeah, because I can definitely send you all the references. But I think like what I found really interesting from all of the data was that you have the same powerful effects on your parasympathetic nervous system just seeing a picture of water as well as being in water. So that to me was the most profound, that the connection to that environment is actually what has the profound effects. Because sometimes I can actually stress myself out, ironically, by feeling that I've been in the city for too long and I don't have time to get out. I don't have time to drive to the coast and see the sea. And I go, well, I feel hyper-trapped and that makes me feel worse. So what I've actually done is put a lot of pictures in my house around it. I've actually bought the sounds of waves with the Lumi light, or I can play it on my phone. And sometimes when I'm just overwhelmed, I would just have a screensaver now that has the water and I can put on the sounds of the sea and you automatically feel calm. And so I think that's, if there's anything for people to take around the blue mind theory is yes, obviously being submerged in water or being able to swim in water or being able to get to the coast is so beneficial for you. It's actually a prescription for mental health, which I think is a really beautiful, powerful way to support your mental well-being. Because I think we talk about mental health, which can sometimes feel quite stigmatized that it's an illness, but we all need to work on it, like doing meditation. We go to the gym, we do yoga, we do mobility, but like how often do we do this for our minds? And we also know that the data shows that when we do spend more time, which is something that I believe is really important in these water environments or connecting more to the blue mind theory, that we become more creative. It connects part to our brain, which increases productivity and creativity. So sometimes we can feel that we're so deep in the weeds that we don't have time to do these things. We don't have time to connect to nature, but actually it makes you more productive. It makes you more creative. So as well as having these like parasympathetic nervous responses, it also makes you more creative. It expands.
And it's the state of healing. It's a place where we do the repair that our system needs.
Yeah.
As we start to wrap up, Sarah, I wonder for our listeners who maybe want to start with just one thing, out of all of the brilliant things that you've shared on your podcast and in this book that's coming, what's one thing that you would recommend for our listeners?
I know exactly what I'm going to recommend. The one thing, and I'm actually going to ask this to you.
Oh, good.
Okay. So the one thing that I believe that can really help as a starting point with all the things that I believe in, such as time for yourself and self-kindness and, good nutrition, is I'm going to ask you this question, and this is what people can do. How often do you go out and buy groceries for yourself and cook yourself a meal that you would cook for other people? To the extent of like how much effort you go to, how often do you do that just for yourself?
Not enough. So first of all, I use Instacart a lot. So I have the food delivered to my house. I'm on deadline for my next book. Just to be honest.
We love honesty because that's realism and that's what everyone's going to connect to.
In answering your question, the part that I love the most is that I take the time to drive all the way to Bolinas in California, which is a teeny little town that has a farm stand. And the farm stand is food that was picked that morning. Incredibly alive food, whatever is in season. And I love to go there. Usually it's on the weekend because I'm not free during the week. And just load up on 20 different vegetables.
Amazing.
There's not any fruit this time of year, but we're talking about delicata squash and cute little purple cabbages and peppers and all different types of lettuces like frisee and pea sprouts and shallots and Brussels sprouts this time of year. That, I think, is the kind of cooking that you're talking about, where you are collecting the food that you would serve to a beloved person that was coming for dinner.
Yeah.
So I do that about once a week.
Okay, well, that's good. That's so much more than most people. Because what I see is that people will maybe once a week or once a fortnight want to cook something for someone they love, whether it's a partner, whether it's their friends, whether it's their parents, whether it's their children. I mean, obviously children is every day, but most of the time people will put a lot of effort into how they cook for others and the ingredients that goes into it. When it comes to ourselves, when we're busy, when, you know, you've got deadlines, when you're exhausted, when you're traveling, you opt for the quickest thing, the easiest thing, of course, because we're time limited. But if there's one thing that I would love someone to start today, is actually making a date with themselves around their food. To go to that supermarket where they go and buy something for someone else, just for them. Their favorite meal that they would cook for someone else, I want them to do just for them. And I want them to take time in the kitchen. I want them to put on their favorite playlist. All of this is going to be for no one else but you. And that is what I would love someone to start with. And it doesn't have to be the healthiest meal on the planet. It's got to be what brings them joy. It's got to be the time that's put into it for them. The music that they love to suggest, the drink that they want to have, how they would slay the table, all of these things just for them and time for them that they would do for someone else. That's the one thing that I would love someone to get started on.
That's hot. I really love that, Sarah. Oh my gosh. Okay, good. I've got my marching orders. So, Sarah, final thoughts. Any last things you want to share about the work you're doing in the world, your mission? Final thoughts.
I would love, if anyone's resonated with anything I said, like drop me a message on Instagram, drop me an email. I read them all because I think, you know, a problem shared is a problem solved. And the more that we connect to common humanity and that we're all always not ever feeling just good enough is the critical missing piece of the puzzle, the missing ingredient. And I'd love for people to, connect with me. Tell me their journey, tell me their story, show me their favorite dish, show me what they've done for themselves, their table setting, their favorite. I love all of that. It brings me so much joy. And just remember that, like, all of this, no one has to leave this and have this thing sorted out called life, called self-kindness, or called self-compassion. It's a learning journey, and it will become easier, and then it will become much harder when shit hits the fan. But the more that we can become resilient in being nice to ourselves, essentially, befriending ourselves, the easier these things will become.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Sarah.
You.
So good to have you with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yay!
I'll sing it.